Hello, all you textual deviants, and welcome to the first episode of Season 3 of Texting. I'm Mark Will in Taipei.
And I'm Tomek in St. Petersburg.
Can you believe we've been doing this for 3 years now?
It's a big moment. It's an exciting moment to be back because we did take a significant hiatus between the end of Season 2 and Season 3, so I'm raring at the bit, Mark. I don't know about you.
Well, we did record a few special emergency editions of the podcast, but yeah, we're now back on our regular schedule, and we will be bringing you, fine folks, 20 new episodes in 2024, the year of the dragon.
Yeah, it's a year where headlines are looking dour, and I think we all need this kind of spiritual, intellectual replenishment, something to take our minds off of conflict and remind us that it's still worth living.
Hopefully so. All right, let's get into it. Our first text of this third season of texting is the Ned Beatty speech from Network. Okay? The world is a business, says Ned Beatty's character, Arthur Jensen. So this speech, let's give a little bit of context for this text. This speech is from the 1976 classic film Network, with screenplay by Patty Chayefsky, and it was directed by the great Sidney Lumet. Have you seen any Sidney Lumet films?
What is he most prominently known for? Because perhaps not.
Well, I know him for Dog Day Afternoon with Al Pacino. That's probably the work I most associate him with. It's about the Attica prison uprising. No, it's not. It's not about that at all. He references the Attica prison uprising, but it's about a guy who, well, it's basically about the Stockholm syndrome, right? Like this guy attempts to rob a bank and he takes all these people hostage and forms strange relationships with them, and he's committing this bank robbery in order to have the money to pay for his boyfriend's sex change operation. So it's based on true events. So
that sounds like a very contemporary text.
Yeah, well, but as I think we'll find, Network is too, in a way, right?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so you probably know this, but Network was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Film. It lost out to Rocky, actually. And also in the category was Taxi Driver, which is interesting, just to put that into a larger context of the films that were big at the time.
Well, I think some of the stars of this ensemble cast, if we can talk about stars in an ensemble cast, and those of you watching can see that 4 of them are pictured here. There's Faye Dunaway, William Holden, Peter Finch, and Robert Duvall. I think Peter Finch won the Academy Award for his performance as Howard Beale, didn't he?
I believe so, which is... And also, I think a woman who's not featured on this poster, I may have her... Yeah, Beatrice Straight. She won an Oscar. She played Bill Holden's wife.
Right.
And she's only in really one significant scene, but that one scene was enough to get her a supporting actress Oscar, which is interesting.
Yeah, she did a good job crying in that scene. Very emotional. Did Faye Dunaway not win Best Actress?
I'm not sure. I don't have the...
We'll have to look that up and put it in the show notes. But anyway, it's a classic Faye Dunaway performance. one she's still very well known for. Okay, so that's the context. Let's actually engage with the text. Here's the first part of that speech, and we'll just take turns reading it because.
Do you want to set it up a little bit first, just to say, who's the speaker and who he's speaking to?
Well, what do you want to say about that? Ned Beatty, as I mentioned before, plays Arthur Jensen, who is the head of a corporation which owns this TV studio, which employs Howard Beale. He's the character played by Peter Finch, mentioned before. And Howard Beale has had a kind of meltdown on the air, and he's adopted this new. Well, this is after he's told that he's going to be terminated, right? They're not renewing his contract, they're forcing him out. And then he just has, like, instead of just being a newsreader, he has a spontaneous, human, real moment on camera, and suddenly the ratings go up on his show. And he's developing a kind of following for reasons that we'll discuss later. But he then encourages his audience to send letters to the White House and to make a public fuss about a deal between Mr. Jensen's corporation and, I guess, Saudi Arabia. Do I have all that right?
Yep. The only thing I was a bit confused about, maybe you can clarify, is that Howard Beale works for a network called UBS, which, is fictional, I guess, but it's just a competitor of the standard networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, etc.
Right.
And then Arthur Jensen
which at this time we should say is really all there was. It's before cable, basically. You just had the three in the U.S. You had those three major networks you mentioned: ABC, CBS, NBC.
Okay.
I was always an NBC guy myself, but that was a long time
That's
ago.
your tribal loyalty.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my question is, apparently Arthur Jensen, the Ned Beatty character, is the chairman of the CCA, which is actually a parent company of UBS. So I'm just a little bit confused because it seems like UBS is already like this giant force. So, for example, is there a parent company of the networks that we're familiar with, like Fox and NBC? Does it go higher than that?
Well, NBC was later bought by GE. I remember that.
Okay.
David Letterman would rail against that kind of corporate control when he was doing his late night show. And he eventually left NBC and went to CBS. And then, like after Clinton passed that Communications Act and basically allowed 6 companies to control all the media, things changed. But in the mid 70s, I think some of these corporate acquisitions of TV companies, and the airwaves are supposed to be public, right? But all this corporate control gradually manifested itself, and I guess we're seeing the beginnings of that in the mid 70s. The William Holden character complains about, like, corporate control of his news. He's the head of the news department, right?
Right.
At UBS. And it was always understood that news was not a money maker. You that's part of the cost of doing business, right? Like, you make your money with your other TV shows, sitcoms or movies or whatever, but the news is supposed to be a public service, so that's not supposed to be commercialized. It's not supposed to be, um, we're not supposed to care about the bottom line. You know that news is a loser financially, but that's part of the cost of doing business. You want to have a TV station, then you have to have a respectable news program that is a public service, and you're going to lose money on that. So we're starting to see the commercialization of the news, and that's absolutely what we have now. But we're starting to see the beginning of that trend in the mid 70s, I guess. Now, the specifics of the business deal that he's railing against, I'm not so clear about that either. Like, it's already owned. UBS is already owned by what were the letters that you mentioned? ACC, CCA,
CCA.
What was
Communications
it?
Corporation of
CCA.
America.
Yeah, so this fictionalized company already owned UBS, so I'm not sure what exactly he was railing about on that particular episode, but the details maybe are not so important because the point is Mr. Jensen, the corporate head, is furious that his employee, Howard Beale, is causing him to lose money in his broadcast. And he's, he would say that he's like rabble
threatening
rousing.
this massive deal with the Arabs, right?
Threatening to scuttle it or
right.
Yeah. And, apparently there's some success. I guess they're writing the White House so that there can be some government regulation, right? So that's an issue which is also of contemporary relevance, like government regulation of corporate entities or lack thereof. So
just coming back a little bit to your discussion of the news as a public service, I've heard that expressed before, and I kind of vaguely was aware that that's the foundation for the news, but it's just hard for me to even imagine how that could even be possible, because were different networks news programs shown at the same time slot, for example? Because if they were, then clearly the element of competition was crucial.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was never a perfect system by any means. Far from it. But there was at least the pretense that, you tune in to the news, whether it's ABC, CBS, or NBC, and you're going to get an unbiased, middle of the road, just the facts, ma'am, presentation. Whereas now, you've got what Matt Taibbi calls Hate Inc., where you're either watching MSNBC, CNN, or Fox News. They're clearly demarcated teams that are being promoted, right? Like when you tune in, the perspective that you're buying.
Although that is cable news. I mean, you could probably make a similar assertion for network news, at least when it comes to stuff like Colbert, who's clearly leftist and isn't attempting to hide that. But I haven't watched mainstream news in ages.
Let's use that term leftist loosely because
of course. But I guess I'm just asking,
mainstream idea of leftist, which is basically shit lib.
Yeah. So, but my only question is, like, does the network news today, does that have the same kind of team element, or is there still an attempt at objectivity from like the NBC nightly news?
Well, but what? Oh, okay. What in
terms of like how they would report Trump versus Biden, for example.
Right. Well, honestly, I don't watch that either. I mean, I don't watch CNN or MSNBC. Actually, CNN has been on over here recently, but that's not my choice. It's just on, and I'm appalled at what I see. Just like when I visit my parents, Fox News is what's on. So both are just cringeworthy. But I was just thinking of like local news. I mean, maybe there you've got more of that old fashioned model of unbiased reporting, but as you
The
say,
aesthetic
that
of
was never
unbiased reporting.
the aesthetic. It's purely aesthetic. It's the appearance of it, not the reality. I mean, as you say, there was always a competitive element, right? Like if you're concerned at all about ratings, then you're not focused on reporting the news. You're worried about being popular, and so we're seeing the beginnings of that unraveling in the mid 70s, and today in 2024 we know what the situation is. But so that's the background for this talking to that Mr. Jensen gives Howard Beale. So he takes him into this conference room, which he calls Valhalla, and there's a long table with all of these. I think those are called banker lamps. Those little green lamps that have the strings that you pull to turn on and off. But he sits him down, and he stands at the head of the table. He pulls down the shades, and with very dramatic flair, he says, "You have meddled with the primal forces of nature, Mr. Beale, and I won't have it. Is that clear? You think you've merely stopped a business deal. That is not the case. The Arabs have taken billions of dollars out of this country, and now they must put it back. It is ebb and flow, tidal gravity. It is ecological balance." And I'll let you take it from there.
You are an old man who thinks in terms of nations and peoples. There are no nations. There are no peoples. There are no Russians. There are no Arabs. There are no third worlds. There is no West. There is only one holistic system of systems. One vast and immane, interwoven, interacting, multivariate, multinational dominion of dollars. Petrodollars, electrodollars, multi-dollars, Reichmarks, rins, rubles, pounds, and shekels. Reichmarks.
It is the international system of currency which determines the totality of life on this planet. That is the natural order of things today. That is the atomic and subatomic and galactic structure of things today. And you have meddled with the primal forces of nature, and you will atone. Am I getting through to you, Mr. Beale?
You get up on your little 21-inch screen and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. There is only IBM and ITT and AT&T and DuPont, Dow, Union Carbide, and Exxon. These are the nations of the world today.
What do you think the Russians talk about in their councils of state? Karl Marx? They get out their linear programming charts, statistical decision theories, minimax solutions, and compute the price-cost probabilities of their transactions and investments, just like we do.
We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies, Mr. Beale. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business, Mr. Beale. It has been since man crawled out of the slime. And our children will live, Mr. Beale, to see that perfect world in which there's no war or famine, oppression or brutality, one vast and ecumenical holding company, for whom all men will work to serve a common profit, in which all men will hold a share of stock, all necessities provided, all anxieties tranquilized, all boredom amused. And I have chosen you, Mr. Beale, to preach this evangel.
And Mr. Beale says, but why me?
Because you're on television, dummy! 60 million people watch you every night of the week, Monday through Friday.
I have seen the face of God.
You just might be right, Mr. Beale.
And so it ends. Well, what can we say about that dramatic monologue? Basically, there's only a little bit of back and forth at the end, but he harangues Howard Beale with his speech about the world being a business. And Beale very quickly changes his tune, doesn't he? Like before, he was happy in his role of rabble rouser and populist prophet, I guess. But he's just so easily swayed and co-opted by Mr. Jensen after this 3-minute speech.
Yeah, what's up with that?
Which is striking, yeah.
Is that down to some degree of intimidation? Like he just realizes that he's suddenly, confronted with this incredible power structure? Or, I mean, why not continue to push back and fight the people's fight? I was a bit confused about that.
Well, to answer that question, I would ask that we consider his response, when he asked, but why me? Because you're on television, dummy. That is the exact same line that he heard in his dream. Remember, he had a dream before he went rogue the first time, and he woke up and he said, but why me? Because you're on television, dummy. That's what the voice in the dream told him. So maybe because he hears that voice again from Mr. Jensen, the exact same line, that's the confirmation that it is the voice or the face of God that's speaking to him.
Right.
That's the only thing that makes sense to me. I mean, I think we're supposed to assume that he is kind of having a mental breakdown, or he's losing his mind in a sense. But at the same time, there's ambiguity there because maybe he really is a kind of prophet channeling the rage of the American people.
Yeah, well, the both ends.
Yeah, as usual. So I think it's a very well written speech. Like the rhetoric is highly effective, and it's almost Shakespearean in its cadences, I guess. And one example that I've always been struck by is the use of this word immane. Did you, like me, have to look this up?
Well, I was grateful that you included it because I think it's something I just kind of skimmed over.
Right.
So yeah,
it's a really interesting choice of diction here, but immane means vast in size. He uses it in the phrase vast and immane, but it means vast in size, enormous, but also inhumanly cruel. That's a secondary meaning of this archaic usage. And if we look at the etymology, as of course I always want to, it's from im, meaning not, manis, which is related to the word for good, and in Latin, the manes were like spirits of the dead. So,
well, just to jump in for 2 seconds, yeah, I think the strength of the screenplay, which is obviously exemplified in this speech, is one of the things that makes this film stand the test of time. Pardon the cliche, because even if aspects of it felt a bit dated to me, and we'll come to that a little bit later when we discuss Bulworth, the fact that it's written so well kept me engaged, kept me interested, just because I was admiring the precise language. It's almost at times hard to believe that people would speak in such an erudite and articulate way. For example, just some of the exchanges that took place between Faye Dunaway and Bill Holden, they felt so, so Shakespearean, obviously with contemporary language, that you find it hard to believe that that would happen spontaneously. But that's also a pleasure to hear that kind of language. And it's funny because I tend to often watch films now with subtitles because I watch them with my wife. So I kind of got to see everything in front of me, and that just doubled the kind of wow factor of the quality of the writing.
well, it's like the language of the theater,
Right, exactly,
I mean,
exactly. And that's what I wanted to say when I mentioned Shakespearean.
yeah. So I think even at that time it was unusual because it's really like a play that has been made into a movie. It's like a play that's been filmed.
Exactly.
So you've got to have dialogue that works in front of an audience and is engaging. You're not just distracted by the visual aspect of the film. That's not enough to hold the audience's attention if you're on the stage. You've got to have well constructed dialogue and I guess there are those voiceovers. There's like a narrator explaining certain plot points.
I mean, I think it's interesting just if we go full circle and remember how we started texting with a perspective on filmmaking that Kaveh Zahedi gives, which is anti this approach very much. I don't know if you remember that, but yeah, he's all about spontaneity and saying that the best films don't do this, don't feel written, and really make you feel like you're actually in a present moment, and all that entails.
But maybe that's why you found Network as a film to be a bit long at times. Like maybe it's better on the page,
Yeah. Well, I just thinking for me, some of the, I don't know, just the way that network television appeared at that time, so much has changed since then. So I felt the time, which is fine, but I felt that this was a film of its time. That's all I mean.
But even if you had watched it as a contemporary viewer, 1976, it may have still seemed to drag at times for that reason. I mean, maybe not, possibly. But I'm just saying, like,
anyway,
it's possible that it's more effective on the page than it is on the screen. It could be,
and I don't
for some
endorse
viewers.
Kaveh's view like to the full, because I think that I would go again with the both and. Like there's a charm to both and a weakness to both, potentially. Even if we talk about writing, right? There's a charm to reading something that's arguably not especially edited, like a spontaneous or Kerouac style. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a greatness to work that's highly edited, where each word is really sweated over. So I think both perspectives have their place.
Well, we talked about in that early episode that you're referring to, we talked about filmmakers like David Lynch or Fellini, their films, you can't imagine reading the scripts. Like the visual aspect is all important. It's like the whole essence of the cinematic experience, So it's just a different approach.
Yeah.
All right. So where does this Shakespearean language come from? Who's responsible for it? Well, that's our boy Patty Chayefsky, who I think his first big success, at least in terms of screenplays, was Marty from 1955. But apart from Network, I know him for Altered States, 1980. That's with William Hurt. I don't know if you saw that, but it's about a guy who is he's based on John C. Lilly, the guy who created the tank, the sensory deprivation tank, and experimented with the LSD and other psychedelic substances. So the altered states are altered states of consciousness. So that was like his script about the experimentation with psychedelics and altered states of consciousness. And I wouldn't say it's a great film, but it is interesting, and it's a topic that he provides a unique perspective on. So I don't know if I would. Yeah, it's probably worth a viewing if you want to explore his work more. But this is interesting too. When he came to, and he was involved in the casting of Network, he rejected
and very
both,
involved in everything.
Yeah. He rejected both Jane Fonda and Vanessa Redgrave for their anti-Israel leanings. And he said basically that, people who were anti-Zionist were anti-Semitic. He was saying that back in 1976. So he was a Zionist, and you sent me a quote from somewhere about his reaction to Vanessa Redgrave's what was it, her Oscar
So
acceptance speech?
Lumet says, responding to Chayefsky's bias here, Lumet, who's also a Jew, said, "Patty, that's blacklisting." To which Chayefsky replied, "Not when a Jew does it to a Gentile."
Yeah, wow.
So that's pretty amusing. I will say that it's slightly interesting for me that, this is getting maybe a bit of an anti-Semitic trope that I'm about to go on, but if we acknowledge that Jews do have a huge influence over the media, which I don't really think is that controversial, it's interesting that on the one hand, he's this flag-waving Zionist, and on the other, that this film is very much like, has an accusatory and polemic tone towards the media. So it's like, there's this sense of, this righteous view of the media as being something that is brainwashing us, manipulating us, and is worthy of intense scrutiny and criticism, while at the same time supporting this. I don't know. Maybe they're not contradictory, but just complicates things, I would say.
1976 was not 2024, right? Like 76 was just less than a decade after Israel's victory in the so-called Six-Day War, when a lot of Americans, even those who were like skeptical of Zionism early on, became like supporters. It's like, oh yeah, Israel kicked ass out there in the Middle East, and there was more American support for Zionism and the Israeli settler colonial project after that. I mean, I've even heard some like debates between Zionists and like who was it? Um, a black you know, civil rights leader. Was it Huey Newton? Um, anyway, he was like saying that he was trying to point out at that time that, you know, this is not a socialist revolutionary experiment. This is settler colonialism that we're seeing in Eretz Israel. And this guy that was debating him was saying, no, like we're the vanguard of the socialist revolution. So that debate was still going on, and among a lot of American so-called progressives, you know, leftists, whatever, there was this idea, mistaken idea, as it turns out, that the Israeli settler colonial project was actually, you know, somehow leftist and revolutionary and socialist, even, right? Because they have the kibbutzim, you know, these communal farms, and you know, they're building a welfare state with a social safety net, which
And
now,
some
of
of those
course, the
things
U.S.
have
taxpayer,
merit
yeah,
to
but
some extent, right? Like a kibbutz has a
that's only for one ethnicity, right? Like
right.
at the same time, you've got a Jim Crow apartheid state, so doesn't really
Sure.
work out ideologically. But anyway, yeah, that's the contradiction that we have to confront when we're dealing with this screenwriter, Patty Chayefsky. Like he is capable of writing these brilliant speeches, and they're rhetorically impressive, and he makes some strong satirical criticisms of the media and other aspects of, you know, American culture and society. And at the same time, as we find out, he's a rabid Zionist, and he believed in this kind of ethno supremacy to such an extent that it's not blacklisting when a Jew does it to you know, a member of the goyim.
Right.
Okay, interesting. All right, so let's move on from him. I just want to you know, look more at the context of the film, because some of these other characters help us understand, you know, Howard Beale and Mr. Jensen, maybe. We
Yeah, I
won't
mean, because we
spend
have
too
to get
much
into
time on this, but
the content of the text as well, I mean, of the speech. I'm eager to.
right.
Yeah.
Well, let's look first at Faye Dunaway, who plays Diana Christensen. She says of herself, "I can't tell you how many men have told me what a lousy lay I am." That's an interesting self-description. But this is her credo, right? Which I think has contemporary relevance. I want angry
Mm,
shows. The American people want somebody to articulate their rage for them. I mean, that's basically that's quite a prophetic statement that she makes, you know, and she wants to,
absolutely.
she even produces this show called the Mao Zedong Hour, right? Like it's it's kind of like the beginning of reality TV. Like she contracts with this armed revolutionary group that, like, they're kind of like the Weather Underground, I guess, or there's another group, the group that kidnapped Patty Hearst is probably a more apt analogy, but they, you know, they film themselves knocking over banks, you know, and then they sell the footage to Diana Christensen, and then she uses that as like the intro, and then they have story writers dramatize the events to fill out the 30-minute episode or 1 hour episode, or well, it's an hour, right? It's the Mao Zedong hour. So this is like proto reality television, I guess you could say, with an emphasis on the salacious and the angry. It's all meant to be provocative. It's tabloid journalism. I guess it's kind of like that show Cops. Do you remember that?
That's crazy because Cops came to mind just 30 seconds ago in my mind.
Yeah.
I was singing the jingle.
Or Cheaters. You know, they would try to catch people cheating on their partners.
I was thinking Jerry Springer.
Oh, Jerry Springer, sure. What was his name?
And just
Morton Downey
as you mentioned,
Jr.
And just the nature of cable news, as you said, it's just feeding the anger, Trump feeding the anger. And I'm not even saying that doesn't have its place sometimes, right? Like, we do maybe need somebody. I mean, we do want that feeling, and you and I probably look for that too often in the media that we consume, is that righteous anger. But yeah, she's
righteous
right to...
indignation. That's the phrase that I was thinking of. And I mean, you know, like, we'll talk later about Howard Beale is a kind of prophet, and you know, they actually used the phrase Jeremiah, you know, which is a screed, often written, but also delivered orally. But it's like something reminiscent of the rhetoric of the prophet Jeremiah, you know, who inveighs against the corruption and injustice of his time. So I
do you remember that pastor? I think his name was Jeremiah, that got Obama in trouble on his first
Jeremiah
campaign run.
Jeremiah Wright,
he was,
I believe
he was also spitting facts. But anyway.
Yeah, well, you highlighted this quote, which I think is very apt. I'll let you read it. This is addressed to Diana Christensen.
Right, from her lover at the time, right? William Holden. So he says to her, "You're television incarnate, indifferent to suffering, insensitive to joy. All of life is reduced to the common rubble of banality. War, murder, death, all the same to you as bottles of beer. And the daily business of life is a corrupt comedy. You even shatter the sensations of time and space into split seconds and instant replays. You're madness, Diana. Virulent? Madness. Virulent,
yeah. Well, it's related, as you noted, that's related to viral, right? Something goes viral. So there's like an early foreshadowing of that phenomenon, and the split seconds you made like a TikTok connection, you know.
Sure.
It sort of prophesizes or anticipates the development of all that. Yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts about this, but let me continue on to the next slide. We've got William Holden as Max Schumacher, and he's the one who, as you say, is Diana's lover for a brief period. He even leaves his wife for her, and this is what causes Beatrice, what was her name? Beatrice Straight, to have her
Straight, I believe,
Academy Award. Yeah, her Academy Award winning performance as supporting actress. But yeah, don't impugn his coxmanship, Diana. He that's such a great phrase. And again, you know, the language of this criticism that he levels against her is the rhetoric is impressive. It's theatrical, dramatic language that maybe we're not accustomed to hearing. Also, the length of these speeches, it's like it's not rapid fire dialogue. You talked about Taxi Driver, right? Like, does any character give a speech of such length in Taxi Driver? I don't think so. It's like, you talking to me? You talking to me? It's not.
Although
It's just
that in itself is kind of a soliloquy,
absolutely, but it's not. I'm just talking about in terms of length, right? And it's
Yeah.
not that language of the stage. It's grittier. It's more. You might say it's more realistic or colloquial, whereas this is theatrical. But that's a
I think
great
that they
phrase.
did table readings for a while. I don't know if we discussed that, but yeah, prior to and doing any shooting, it was very much the theatrical approach where they were doing table readings and getting into character that way.
Yeah, well, I can well imagine it. But that's a phrase to remember. I mean, give Patty Chayefsky credit for that. Impugn his coxmanship. Don't impugn his coxmanship. All right, so yeah, these are some of the themes that came to mind, especially when he's upbraiding her for her basically lack of soul and her corruption. He says the world is becoming humanoid in 1976. How do we feel about that today? And then I think there's
what
this.
about the original speech though? Just when are we gonna really close read that?
Well, I think it's
the
related.
Ned Beatty speech. Are we gonna look at that? Sure.
Sure.
But I just mean, can we at some point really just look at some of the text from that?
Yeah, you want to
we
go
can do that
back
after this.
You want to go back to
as you prefer. I don't mind about the sequencing. Well, I just think the content itself, I want to get into it. This idea of, nation states being replaced by corporations, and whether we fully endorse this position, whether we have some caveats. Is that our endorsed worldview?
Let's come back to that.
Okay.
Let's save that for the end. But
sure.
I just wanted to point out how, there seems, in Network as a whole, if you consider the entire film, I think it's emphasizing these themes that I've listed here. The whole world is becoming humanoid. We're losing our humanity. We seem to be human, but we've lost all of our humanity. We're still soft machines that appear to be human, but we have no human spirit. And I think Chayefsky is probably trying to indicate that it's due to our illiteracy. There's a kind of dumbing down. And also he seems to think this might be his boomerish or proto-boomerish mentality, right? Like it's a generation gap. Oh, these kids today, they don't read, and they're all focused on their TikTok. And I just wonder, to what degree is that due to the fact that, as Marshall McLuhan says, the medium is the message, meaning, TV will never be the same as a book, right? The film can never replace literature and so on. But what is your reaction to that, and how does that relate to today? Have we seen a gradual dumbing down since 1976? And what is the proliferation of all this hate-filled, partisan TV, and the rise of TikTok and viral videos and algorithms and so on? Has that made us more humanoid?
It's definitely created a different type of human. I'm hesitant to say that, that the younger generation is dumber. I think you'd have to really pull that apart more, because I just immediately think of some of my students who are wonderful critical thinkers and really sharp, really witty. But at the same time, there's no doubt that when the dominant form of consumption, coming back to the medium as the message, is in these very, very rapid fire clips and scrolls, it creates a different type of human. I'd prefer to say different.
It's
a different type of human.
Is it what we could describe as like an attention deficit type of human? Meaning there's no patience for long form.
There's no patience. Yeah, deficit, even that word seems to, confer some degree of like
judgment
of inferiority to a certain norm. It's a different type of attention span.
But I mean,
it demands satiation quickly.
Okay, but before I became really immersed in literature and reading, as the Talking Heads song says, I was born in a house with the television always on. I mean, I grew up as a product of TV and movies, right? I didn't read until I was in my teens. And as I've said before, like I came to literature through songwriting, right? Like I'm trying to write 3-minute songs and I'm so illiterate and inarticulate that I have to read to become more adept at using my own native language. And I
it's
know
a very Bukowskian story.
Well, I just want to say that
right?
I just want to say that I know I was attention deficit, and maybe I still am in a way, but I had to like train myself, discipline myself, force myself. I'm gonna read 100 pages today, and I don't care how long it takes or how uncomfortable it makes me. I'm going to do it. I had to force myself to do that. And so if you don't have that discipline, if you don't set that project, assign yourself that project, you're not encouraged to do it, right? Because everything is rapid fire, immediate, instant gratification. That's sort of what it has to be by design, right? There's a reason why all of that stuff is pushed and favored by the algorithm, isn't it? Like the deep thinking.
I don't think it's necessarily to create a.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, but I just think that's probably still just driven by not necessarily something nefarious, right? But just something that's profit driven.
Oh, I think it's totally nefarious.
Which could be nefarious.
That's totally nefarious. I think it is. I mean,
sure, but not from a place of like maybe a desire to destroy us, but rather a desire to profit from us. Again, which you could say is synonymous.
I think it is. I mean,
maybe that's the key.
I was just watching a Whitney Webb video, and she's saying that the most important thing to watch out for when we're overwhelmed by all of this new technology with AI and so on is that you can use it as a tool if you choose to, and we experimented with that some in season 2, right? Our little forays into Chat GPT, which was rather comical, but the most important thing is that you not become dependent on it, and you maintain your critical thinking ability. And it's encouraging when I hear you say that your students, are excellent critical thinkers. Like they can be exposed to, and we can't assume that they're all dumbed down just because they are the TikTok generation or whatever. Like they still have one way or another developed this faculty for critical thinking and creativity. Those are the two things that as an educator myself, I think are the most important things we can impart to students, right? To encourage critical thinking and creativity. And as long as
Absolutely.
and as
Absolutely. It's
long as those
paramount.
and as long as those things are being transmitted, they hopefully have the tools to deal with whatever technological manipulations are coming at them.
Yeah, and I'm very uncomfortable with the transition to this immediacy. Like I still am a traditionalist, but I'm just trying to complicate my own narratives by reminding myself that certain aspects of modern technology or the phone can be
Mm-hmm.
stimulating for the brain. You know, whether it's the fact that young people today are producing so much more content maybe than the average young person may have in the TV time, right? Like now they are the ones often creating the TikTok videos, creating the memes, or so on. And also they're getting exposed to a lot of different perspectives than they may have seen previously. Like we see with Palestine and Israel right now, the huge like viral capacity of pro-Palestinian views. I
And
see
they
that you are
get it.
slightly
They
distracted there, buddy.
well they get it. They get it. Like the
Yeah,
as one of those Israeli propagandists was saying, like, we're losing the younger generation because they get it. They see what's really going on. They're smarter than their elders on that issue,
right.
like in general.
Or the fact that we see Trump actually is leading Biden right now among younger voters. That's crazy. I mean,
Mm,
it's crazy if we consider the historical precedent.
right.
And that's not an endorsement of Trump, but it's an endorsement of like young people being critical
Yeah.
and no longer feeling this obligation to align themselves in a certain like typical way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm very optimistic about the Zoomers or whatever they're called. I mean, I am disgusted when I hear boomers talking about, oh, this generation, what's the world coming to? I find
I
that
saw
loathsome.
I saw a funny cartoon a couple days ago. You may have seen this before because I think it's nothing especially new, but it's like someone being beheaded in France, and the head is being held up to the mob in front of them,
Mm-hmm.
and the comment underneath is, "Look at all these people, no phones, just living in the moment." So, I don't know. So it's like, yeah, we have to be careful to romanticize. Uh, Phones depress me. Like another video I think I sent you was Navarra Media
I lost you
criticizing
there.
the crowd in front of the New Year's fireworks in Paris
Yes, I
because all
saw
you
that
did was see
too.
phones recording them. So
Yeah.
that's there too. I mean, the criticism is absolutely valid,
Mm-hmm.
um, but it just doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't mean that we have the right to condescend to the younger generation or to assume that we have some sort of intellectual superiority.
No, indeed. All right. Well, let's talk about Peter Finch in
Okay.
his Academy Award winning performance as Howard Beale, the mad prophet of the airwaves. And we've talked about how, well, mad in this context is insane, crazy, right? But there's another
Right.
usage of mad that occurs later. But I think it's interesting how Chayefsky says or has Beale say about himself that he is imbued with some special spirit, what I think the Hindus call prana, that is breath or energy. So we talked about how Chayefsky was interested in psychedelics and altered states of consciousness. He's also got this kind of 1970s or 60s and 70s interest in, Eastern religious concepts. So
Yeah.
It's at the same time as he's Jeremiah, Howard Beale, he's also a kind of, uh, guru, I guess you could say. And now we come to his catchphrase and the second meaning of mad, meaning angry, right? So there's mad crazy and there's mad angry. I'm mad as hell and I'm not gonna take this anymore. I mean, that is like, that could be the catchphrase of any number of commentators today, couldn't it? From Jimmy Dore to Alex Jones to Russell Brand to who
Bill
else?
O'Reilly.
Yeah, well,
I just said Bill O'Reilly.
that was
Keith Olbermann.
back in the day. Yeah, right.
Sure. But yeah.
Those are mainstream examples that you're giving, but yeah, it's maybe that's more apt because Beale is mainstream too. But yeah, the channeling of and the articulation of anger and rage, the righteous indignation of the crazy prophet who's also, angry. Um, it's still relevant today, and I don't know. There are good and bad aspects to this, of course. Like,
yeah.
if we think of
But
the
this is why I'll often
siloing
turn to a book
to escape this.
Yeah, sorry to talk over you there. Yeah, because like I'll just notice my own consciousness and the response I feel physically, right? If we talk about the whole this new book that I've been thinking about, it's not even a new book, but it's the Body Tells the Score. Have you heard of that book?
No.
Body Keeps the Score.
No.
It's like a massive book in the self-help industry that came out a few years ago, but it's like an interesting idea. The body keeps the score, so that really you can always kind of sense how you're doing by just getting in touch with where you're at physically. It's like obviously a yoga idea as well, but
well, mindfulness.
Yeah, I'm trying to cut my
meditation.
Twitter use. Yeah, I'm trying to cut my Twitter use in 2024. One of my New Year's resolutions is to only use Twitter on the toilet. So
okay, that's
sometimes
probably the best place.
It extends those business meetings, as me and my wife like to call the number 2.
Mm-hmm.
It extends it longer because I get to get my Twitter hit. But no, I think the book just gives you a more philosophical view of everything that's happening in the world and kind of puts it in a historical context and makes you realize that what you're experiencing now is something that is nothing new, and it's kind of inevitable part of being a human is to see war going on around you, to see humans acting like savages, and acting in beautiful ways, of course, but I think it's kind of a wiser perspective that you get from reading, right? One that's less triggered by everything that's going on and less shocked by things that are going on.
Well, it's more nuanced, less reactive, less
yes
instinctual, maybe. Yeah. So
yeah, and I prefer to nurture that side of me.
Yeah, well, in that sense, the medium is the message in a way, because when you engage with a book, that's a very different experience from engaging with a video.
Sure, and then we also talk about the separation of time as well. Like if you're reading a book that comes from a previous time, kind of helps you realize that things are not so specific to your time.
Well, I thought you were talking about time in relation to how we experience it or consume it as a text, right? Like
both.
Yeah.
But also the fact that you're seeing different reflections of the world from different times and seeing the kind of continuum rather than this new apocalyptic experience. We know that for hundreds of years people have been feeling like they're right on the verge of the apocalypse.
Yeah. Well, could we say that, the medium of literature helps you slow down time.
Yeah.
I mean, it
Yes.
it allows you to go at your own pace, and you can
Mm-hmm.
reread. Of course, you can replay a video, but it's a different experience, a different sensual experience, and maybe it's more conducive to that meditative mindfulness state that you're talking about when you're in touch with the body, right? Like if you're
Yeah.
on a screen, you're just getting that, you're getting a particular um, rapid fire physical sensation that's entirely reactive or almost entirely reactive, whereas when you slow things down, you have the chance to get in touch with more of, you can do like a legit body scan, mentally.
Yeah. Although then, even in the world of literature, there's so much variety because as you're saying this, I'm thinking about the experience of reading Bukowski is a very different one to reading Proust, physically even,
Mm-hmm.
and the effect it'll have on your psyche. So obviously, even within these large spheres, there's huge variety. Or in the types of films that you watch,
Well,
there can be
yeah,
films that are very slow and meditative, and films that are, action films. So yeah,
and we're not advocating hierarchies here, I don't
no,
think. I mean,
sure.
we're
No,
all
we're
about
noticing.
inclusivity, and we as textual deviants, we recommend experiencing all manner of texts.
Absolutely. But maybe just to be in control and be aware of what you're consuming.
Sure, yeah, doesn't mean we can't make distinctions. All right, so moving on, this is Diana Christensen's, final decision about what to do with the mad prophet of the airwaves once he's out of control. And, you know, why does she advocate for this course of action? I suppose we'll have to kill him, she tells the Robert Duvall character, whose name I can't remember, but uh, in the film, I can't remember the character's name, but why do they decide
Frank
this?
Hackett.
Because Frank Hackett, there you go. Because his
Sorry.
ratings are going down. His ratings are going down. So
Right.
that's it. He must be eliminated. And that's how the film ends, right? This was the story of Howard Beale, the only man ever killed for low ratings.
Right.
And that brings
So
us
should we
to,
jump into that initial speech a little bit? Yeah, okay,
yeah,
perfect.
yeah, yeah. That brings us back to Ned Beatty as Arthur Jensen, who has, I thought this was an interesting description. This is Hackett,
Yeah.
or the Robert Duvall character's description of Mr. Jensen. He has a sinister silkiness, he says. Maybe some of that is apparent in the speech, but I like that descriptor. But yeah, I'm just wondering, and this might lead us back to the original text, but you know, uh, as they're having that meeting, this is the Duvall character Hackett, and then the Faye Dunaway character Diana Christensen. Um, they want to pull Beale off the air, right? But um, Arthur Jensen, the big boss, does not agree, and this part confuses me. Why? Why doesn't he care whether or not Beale's show loses money, first of all? And why does he think that Beale, why does he like Beale? And why does he think he's good for America? Didn't he say in the speech that there is no America, there is no democracy, there are no countries? You know what I mean? Isn't there a
Yeah.
contradiction there? Like what does he mean by that? I mean, it's reported secondhand. The Hackett character tells Diana that Mr. Jensen is opposed to taking Howard Beale off the air because he thinks he's good for America. Is that just muddled thinking, or is it hypocrisy, or what? Because in his speech to Mr. Beale, he said there are no countries, there is no America, there are no nations, there's only corporations. Is he trying to have it
Yeah,
both
well, I guess
ways?
responding to the first question, I would say he doesn't really care what's good for America. He's just saying, like, the human beings living in this geographical space of America, it's like it's good for, tranquilizing them. Well, it will be good if he can preach Jensen's message, then he will be successfully serving out an opiate to this particular geographical area of human beings.
Okay, I like that. That makes sense. So even if it's like an opportunity cost or the cost of doing business, even if the show loses money, it's kind of worth it because it stupefies, it dumbs down the populace, and it distracts them, from the real crimes that are going on. He can be he can manipulate Beale in such a way that it'll just keep the hoi polloi distracted, and they won't notice what's really going on.
Yeah, and I think even today, it wouldn't surprise me if the powers that be can sometimes can to some extent accept if people are turning away from network news, and this is something I mentioned in my notes, and watching YouTube and getting their media or their reaction to the news, either their news directly or their reaction to the news through other sources. Sure, they're not thrilled about it, but I think as long as they view TV news as paramount or broadsheet, as long as that still carries some kind of social weight, like this is the official line, then it's like they can kind of lend credence to the way that everything is run, the way that government is run, the statements that are put out by politicians. They have that protection. So we can be raging, and more people can be getting their news from YouTube and upset about what's going on, but I think it still leaves us fairly impotent if we don't have access to these spaces. I mean, I'd like to express that better than I am, but does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I like what you said about America not really being America, but it's just like the name of the designated prison camp for that particular section of the world population, right? Like we're organized into all. We know a person like Mr. Jensen knows that the real power is all the corporations, right? But the populace has to still believe it's still beneficial for the elites to have the populace believe that there are such things as nation states, right? It's that is good for them in a sense because it allows them to keep their con going. If a sizable portion of the population still believes in things like the sovereignty of the nation and popular will and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, there
isn't that
you could say that there was a clash that took place, like with the Russia-Ukraine war, and I don't espouse to be an expert on it, but from a layman's perspective, that some people have argued that that was a clash between corporations and nation states. Russia demanding the right to remain a nation state and kind of exercising that autonomy through weaponry, right? Essentially through the states. And in Russia, Putin has quite a bit of power over the businesses.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I mean, I would just say, all I'm trying to say is that if we do come back to Jensen's message, you could say that a nation state itself is another one of the companies vying for control. So that in some cases you've got corporations up against corporations, and the nation is another type of business, which is fighting for its place as well. So I'm just saying the nation states absolutely do exist, but I think that they're playing along the rules that we usually associate with businesses, right?
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, it's still all about money. I would agree with that, but I would just say that nation states are very much relevant in the conversation. I don't know what you think.
Well, even in the speech itself, as he's saying there are no countries, there are no nations, he's also saying the Arabs have taken money out of this country and they must put it back. So,
right. Or he says when the Russians get together. So even the fact that Russians are getting together not as a business but as a state or whatever.
yeah.
But I do think it's very useful to use that lens that he's implementing to read our world. I mean, I think that's crucial, and it's I don't know, it's like one of those steps that people make in their spiritual growth when they start to realize that they start to push past their ego a little bit and realize that the other people, that they would be other people if they were in their shoes. Very simple thing like that. Just the concept of real empathy and understanding in human relationships. The same thing you would hope transfers over to people's understanding of global politics. And sorry if I'm getting like a little bit like ephemeral here, but I think it's like a step that many people don't take, with because they continue to believe in their nation state, and that's the kind of we want to puncture that,
but
right?
but his ideology is not necessarily a preferable substitute. Like, we would almost prefer that people be more concerned with their national sovereignty than with seeing the world as a business. That's not necessarily a preferred substitute,
But
is
if it's
it?
more truthful, you want people to see things as they are.
Well, yes, see that and recognize it, but not subscribe and promote and believe in that idea as Mr. Jensen does, right? Like, to him, that's
Right.
okay. Well,
and that's why it's like strange that you would think that Beale could take that information and still put forth a very working class, like revolutionary mantra, because nothing that Jensen has said would compel you to embrace the fact that the world is like that. So it can be true and at the same time like be worthy of fighting against. And that's why it's weird that Beale just kind of like becomes sedated through that. Yeah.
Again, I think it might be because he really believes in that calling as a
Right.
prophet or a servant of God. I just want to say that the analog that occurred to me as I was thinking about the Arthur Jensen character would be someone like Rupert Murdoch, right? Like, he's just a scumbag businessman. Arthur Jensen tells us he began as a salesman. He sold everything, and he could sell anything to anybody, like an Amway guy that could sell you a bucket or a luxury car or a family Bible or anything. He just knows how to sell things. But also becomes a media mogul because he realizes that manipulating the public and their perceptions of things is true power.
And isn't it also kind of ironic that when he says like, oh, when Russians get together, they don't discuss Marx, they discuss statistics and profit, just like we all do. At the same time that Marx is the one who said like this is all bullshit. The companies are all against you, and we should be thinking in a transnational way about, workers of the world unite. That's so it's like actually, so like, yeah, it's like Marx is already quick in that sense, right? I just there's some kind of irony there in a way, because Marx would be a Marxian response would be one of the empowering and sophisticated responses to what Beale has said, right? In a way, I mean, isn't that kind of what Marx is addressing directly?
Yeah, I think so.
By the way, Mark, I think if you're okay, if we could like do a part 2 to this podcast where we talk about Bulworth and just slap it on as an addendum, because I think I'm not going to have time. And we could do it like tomorrow or whatever. We just do 20-30 minutes or something on Bulworth.
Okay, well, let's see if there's anything else left here.
Sure, we can keep going. I just wanted to say that because I'm kind of cognizant of the time.
Okay,
and,
well, this is the segue to that second part.
Okay.
Ned Beatty, the actor, was not related to Warren Beatty. They were both born in 1937, but Ned jokingly referred to Warren as his illegitimate uncle. And of course, Warren Beatty is the man behind Bulworth. So we'll pick it up there in our addendum.
Perfect. Yeah.
And hopefully
Please.
you can tie together. I mean, it was you who noticed these parallels between Network and Bulworth. I think you described Network as like a less entertaining version of Bulworth or something to that effect.
For me, with my generation and my cultural interests,
Bulworth is
being
a great
hip hopper
film.
and all that.
Bulworth is a great film.
Cool.
So yeah,
let's chat about it, and we'll come back in part 2.